Hey everybody. Today we're going to be creating and using global variables in ShuttleOps. To get started, we navigate to the Vault tab. Here we're presented with the Vault interface. This allows us to add global variables, which we can later reference in deploy pipelines and build pipelines. Now, the reason why it's called Vault is because we're using HashiCorp Vault to encrypt the values of these global variables at rest. This means that whether you're using something that is not sensitive, like a variable that is going to be representing the name of a service, or whether you are using something sensitive like a database password, it's either way going to be encrypted at rest. So not every single global variable is a secret, but any global variable can be a secret if it contains something sensitive. And it's going to be transparently encrypted at rest in Vault. So all you have to do is add it here. So the variable that we're going to be adding today is going to be used to override the default listening port in Grafana. So this is not a sensitive value. This is simply going to be the port number, which is 8080. And I'm going to add the description. And now we've created our first global variable. Because this is going to be overriding the default listening port in Grafana, we are going to create a deploy pipeline to deploy Grafana and then reference that global variable in the destination. So for the source, we're going to be adding a container registry, a Docker Hub container registry, and for the destination, we're going to add a Kubernetes cluster. And this is going to be a basic pipeline. I'm going to name the pipeline and the application both Grafana because we are deploying Grafana, and I'm going to create it. Now we can configure a component, which is just the Grafana/Grafana container image on Docker Hub. I'm going to add that. And then when we configure our destination, we need to go to the add a new pod template. And we can see that Grafana is already selected. And now we want Grafana to be publicly accessible, so we're going to add a service of type load balancer. When we're adding the port, rather than using the default port of 3000 as a target port, we're actually going to add our port 8080. Now we're not ready to launch yet because we simply configured which container image we're going to deploy for our Kubernetes deployment and the port that's going to be mapped in our Kubernetes service. But we still haven't actually referenced our global variable. To do that, we go to add a config map. And here we're going to add the same environment variable name as the key in the config map. And so that is going to be gf_server_HTTP port. This is the environment variable that Grafana adheres when it's going to determine which port it's going to be listening on. And the nice thing here is we can reference our global variable. So if we go to the value field and type in $, this view pops up. We can reference things like our user, their username, our organization, or the time, but we're going to be referencing global variable. So now our config map is created. And the last thing we need to do is to create a config map key reference in our container spec. So when we open up the pod template view, we can then go down to the container spec tab. And we can have our config map key ref. So the key has to match what we had in our config map. So we can add that. And now we're ready to go. So now our pipeline is ready to launch. You can see here that it successfully launched. Now we can go to our Manage tab. We can navigate to the Clusters tab within the Manage tab. Click the cluster that we are deploying to. Click the namespace we're deploying to, which is default. And now we can see our Kubernetes service, and we can see our Kubernetes deployment. To show you what the actual rendering of the YAML looks like, we can go to the deployments and click Grafana. The modal pops up with the YAML, and if we scroll down, we can see here that in the container spec, we have our environment variable, gf_server_HTTP port, and we can see this value from clause, which actually has a config map key reference with the variable of the same name. So we're going to Close that. Now we can see this in action if we click the external endpoint link for our service. We can see that we can reach Grafana. And now remember, our global variable is set to the value 8080. And in our deploy pipeline, we've set the Kubernetes service in destination to target port 8080. And we have referenced the global variable that's rendered dynamically in the config map, and we're using it in the container spec. So in the container, Grafana is sitting on port 8080. The Kubernetes service is targeting port 8080, and we can reach Grafana. That means our rendering and use of our global variable has worked. Now, hopefully this was useful for understanding how to create global variables, how to use them in terms of deployment pipelines, and also to understand that they can be used for both non-sensitive and sensitive values. I hope this was useful and that you're able to use global variables to make your deploying and building of applications easier.